Texas as a literary state. So thank you for all your hard work, Sundaria. Well, okay, I guess I have the power right now because I can let people in. And so I'm just going to go ahead and get started with the Big Texas Read today. I want to thank everybody for being here. At the end of Mike and Heather's discussion, we'll open it up for Q&A. But in the meantime, if you could just mute your mic so that we don't hear, like I've got a dog that's actually barking right now. Hopefully he doesn't come sniffing at the door, but
I wish he would. It's appropriate.
Come on in, Buster. So just be thinking if you have any questions during the discussion, just put those in the chat and we'll get to those afterwards. But we'll go ahead and kick it off. Again, thank you to Sundaria for organizing this great Dallas Literary Festival. It's so fun to be here on a Saturday. So thank you for joining us. You're here because maybe you saw a post from Heather or the Dallas Literary Festival or Writing Workshops Dallas or Gemini Inc. However you're here, thank you for being here. My name is Blake Kimzey. I'm the Executive Director of Writing Workshops Dallas. And along with Gemini Inc. and Big Texas Read co-founder David Samuel Levinson, who is a 2021 Texas Institute of Letters inductee. Congratulations, David. We're proud to present the Big Texas Read as part of the Dallas Literary Festival this year. So thank you to Sundaria for the invitation to participate in this great literary festival, which we hope will be in person next year and we can all gather together. I do want to thank our sponsors all year long through the pandemic since we launched this with David and Gemini Inc. Lone Star Literary has helped us spread the word. They are great. They're a great resource for all things literary here in the great state of Texas. So head over to their website, check out Lone Star Literary. We also want to thank the UT San Antonio Library System. They've been awesome. They've helped us spread the word. And, that's how we've had, people attend each week is through all the help. And then, of course, this time around, we've had the help of the Dallas Literary Festival, which is having events going on all weekend throughout the rest of the day and tomorrow. So be sure to go to their website and check out more great events with the Dallas Literary Festival. And then as book nerds, we would not be here also without our great independent bookstore sponsors here in Dallas and Terabang Books and down in San Antonio, the Twig Bookshop. So just lots of great, exciting things going on, and check out Interabang and the Twig Bookshop. They've got great books for sale, and then also events as well. So before I introduce our two special guests today, I'd like to hand it over to Alexandra Vandekamp, who I'm so happy to know through David, through the Big Texas Read. She's the tireless executive director of Gemini Inc. down in San Antonio. So I will hand it over to you, Alexandra, to tell us a little bit about Gemini Inc.
Sure, just welcome everyone for coming. I'm really excited to have Heather Harper Ellett here and Mike Yawn as our featured guest moderator. Gemini Inc., if you don't know, we are the Writing Arts Center of San Antonio. Believe it or not, we've been around for 27 years. Woo-woo, not a small accomplishment for a Writing Arts Center, and we're proud of that. Our mission is to teach the craft of writing to individuals of all skill levels so they can bring their stories to life. So one thing we love to do is to create wonderful literary events like the Big Texas Read that bring writers and readers together. And I can't think of a better example than today's afternoon. Thank you for setting your afternoon aside for this reading and then Q&A with Heather Harper Ellett. We're going to hear a lot about her book, Ain't Nobody Nobody, and Mike Yawn is the moderator. So yes, please just type questions into the chat. There is the open kind of audience Q&A for the last half an hour. We want to hear from you. And I'm not going to take any more time, and I'm going to hand it back to Blake because we want to get to the writers.
Yes. Well, real excited to introduce these two. Our moderator today is Mike Yawn, who is the director of the Center for Law, Engagement, and Politics at Sam Houston State University. So he's going to be leading us in the discussion today. And I'm really excited that we get to discuss Ain't Nobody Nobody. Kathleen Kent, who we love, the New York Times bestselling and Edgar-nominated author of The Dime, said about Heather's novel, "The dark poetry of East Texas has found a new lyrical voice in Heather Harper Ellett's debut book, Ain't Nobody Nobody, where the landscape is as feral and potentially deadly as the predators that inhabit it, and where love and loyalty can prove as dangerous as greed and betrayal." So born and raised in the piney woods of East Texas, Heather Harper Ellett is a graduate of SMU. She's a therapist in private practice, She lives in Dallas with her husband and son. Her debut novel, Ain't Nobody Nobody, was published by Polis Books. And this is a riveting debut novel about family and loyalty, old grudges and new lives. And Ain't Nobody Nobody is a cross between Faulkner and Breaking Bad from a talented new writer with an authentic Texas voice. So please join me in welcoming Mike Yawn and Heather Harper Ellett to the Big Texas Read.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this, Mike.
Yes, thank you. It's an honor and a privilege. And thank you for that introduction, Alexandra and Blake. Heather, Blake really hit on some of the highlights. I actually, in doing some research for this, I tried to look up bad reviews. I was going to do kind of a reading to see how you responded. And honestly, there were no bad reviews to be found.
There was one lady on barnesandnoble.com who said that she needed to take a shower after she read the book. So,
well, maybe she needed a shower before she read the book. I did not go to Barnes and Noble. I did go to Amazon, and really it was 4.6 average review on Amazon. And anybody who had a negative rating didn't say anything. And so how does it feel to be compared to William Faulkner in your debut work?
Well, that was very sweet, and I pushed back when my publisher said that, and I said I don't think that's accurate, and he said, well, it's going on the book, so that's I appreciated the comparison, of course, but yeah, I don't know if I can buy into that entirely.
Well, we've got quite an audience, and some of them may not have read the book. So could you provide us with an overview just so we can get a context for some of the things that we'll be talking about later?
Yes, it's set in deep East Texas, a town with no name in the 90s. And an ex-sheriff, Randy Mayhill, wakes up one morning and he sees a dead body on his neighbor's fence. And the neighbor happens to be the land of his dead best friend, Van, who you'll hear a little bit about later. But still living there is Van's daughter, who survived him, and his mother, Oni, who survived him. And so because he is a disgraced ex-sheriff, and he's also very much this hero type who just has to save everyone, kind of a savior type, he decides that this dead body is his path to redemption. And he kind of goes off on this whole vigilante search to figure out what happened, also to protect Birdie and Oni, because he feels like it is his duty. And there is a farmhand there also named Bradley who works for Birdie and Oni, and he gets in the mix. And we find out that Bradley is involved with some dark forces going on behind the pine curtain, but we don't entirely know what all that is yet. There are also a lot of hogs, thus the cover. Because East Texas, along all of Texas, is being taken over by hogs. There are also dogs, because you have to have a dog in East Texas.
That's true, and there are a lot of East Texas references, but the themes are really universal. Could you and this book has been described many ways, and I think because of its complexity, different people have described it almost in a projection-like format, where their thoughts are what's describing it at the time, rather than maybe what the book is actually about, just the layers of complexity and the interaction that the reader brings to it. Could you read us a little portion that maybe captures some of the themes in the book?
Yeah, some of my favorite scenes actually are very dialogue heavy, but I have yet to hear a reading where someone is really good at bringing dialogue back and forth. So I'm going to choose a prose heavy piece because I don't want to take y'all back to my one-act play days. But this is just simply one page, but I think it does a good job of setting the tone for the book and introducing some characters, and also the settings of East Texas are starting to be presented here, but also there is a kind of spiritual element that floats throughout the book that I touch upon here. As a reminder, Van is the dead best friend who committed suicide. Trash is the great equalizer, Van had always said. Even somebodies were nobodies at the dump. You paid for a permit, though it was more like a membership fee, like at the country club. Mayhill didn't know anybody who was a member of a country club, but everyone was a member of the dump. Mayhill had burned his own trash since embarking on a career in hermitry, and trash burning was the only time he or any of the local men could be found in shorts. His own shorts were a ratty royal blue number made out of t-shirt material and holes, a relic from high school football. The task of burning trash left him sweaty, puckered, and red, and if it weren't for the teeth and the coat of ash on his skin, one might swear he was a newborn baby who stood 6'5" in jeans he had clearly outgrown. Virgil Fuller tended the dump and was missing 3 fingers on account of Desert Storm and friendly fire. And Van had said that Virgil tried to recreate the hell of war so completely that he decided to tend the dump and marry Patsy Fuller. The fire was the obvious reason for its comparison to hell, but the less nuanced reason was Patsy herself, who Van and Mayhill agreed was a more aggressive version of Saddam Hussein. A year before, at Van's funeral, Mayhill would overhear Patsy Fuller say that suicide was an offense that sent you straight to hell. Straight to hell, she said, her finger pointing the wrong way to the sky and her underarms flapping like bat wings. She had said it with the same certainty that I-45 sends you straight to Houston, and Mayhill, who worshipped the law and Lonesome Dove in that order, for the first time considered hell as a real locale, an inhabitable destination like Puerto Rico or Salt Lake City. But all he could do was imagine Van at the dump, shoveling burnt egg cartons and junk mail into the embers, his white legs singed under the tattered shorts, and Mayhill took comfort in knowing that if hell was real, Van wouldn't have minded the manual labor so much, though he would have minded eternity in shorts. Perhaps Mayhill thought that was the hell everyone was talking about.
You know, I love that passage, and it does capture the characters, the voice, the setting. And just one of the things that I love, how do you come up with the metaphors and similes? So I think her underarms are flapping like a bat's wings. And you know what I admire about them? They're not only clever turns of phrase, but they often often establish the setting. So I think at one point, Mayhill's belt buckle stands like a monolith. And so that's very East Texas, that's very Texan. And so you're able to use this language that draws you in, but also works on several other layers as well, helping with characterization, helping with the setting. How do those come to you? Do you just have these ideas and then you write them down and find the appropriate time to put them in, or do they come naturally as you're writing?
The first one, I mean, honestly, I guess both, honestly. I mean, because I think very much in connections. I don't think that makes me very unique as a writer, but everything is always connected to something else. Even whenever I'm describing a story to my husband, I set the context of it was just like this other time when, and I don't know if that's a like stereotypical female brain at work because we're good at making connections that way. But yeah, I do think a lot in images, and I do set out purposefully to add some of that stuff in because I might see something like a belt buckle that looks like a tombstone and I will write that down and then I will figure out how to put that in the book later. But honestly, what I have been doing a lot with my current book is I'm like, I really like this line, so I'm going to figure out a scene that goes around it. And so I actually let the lines kind of dictate the story, which makes it the most inefficient, horrible way to write that I would not recommend to anyone. But I find a lot of joy in the language aspect of it. So I'm going to let the joy part dictate it as much as possible.
You know, it's Heather, it's interesting that you say that, and I don't think you've told me that before, but I saw that your book was in one review compared to Fargo, and I'm almost positive that's the way the Coen brothers write some of their scenes. They start off with what I think is a very funny kind of vignette or anecdote, and then they build a whole scene around it and then somehow fit it into the plot. And of course, their movies are very enjoyable. That scene that you read also has, I think, some of the universality of it. So we see a heroic but also comical Mayhill. He's got the 6'5" Texan, but he's a little overweight. He wears ill-fitting clothes. He sort of limps. I actually thought he was an older man until I was reminded that he's only in his mid-40s, you know, and so he does go from the heroic to the tragic to the comic, and those are motifs that appear throughout the book. Describe it as if it's accurate to call it a tragic comedy or a tragic comic book, novel. Describe what that means to you and why you thought that was an appropriate approach.
Well, I do think that the voice ended up kind of dictating it. And so I don't want to sound like, one of these mystical writers who it's like, it just was channeled through me. But I do feel like something came alive about the book when the voice got just right. And I don't know if it was just the way that I was raised or the way that I processed tragedy, but I mean, humor is just on the other side of tragedy. And I think, like Steel Magnolias, that scene at the end where they're in the graveyard weeping and then it's like, hit her, hit her. I mean, I think that it is in tragedy that the seeds of comedy are the greatest and the more prolific, or the more robust is perhaps the word. And so I think it just naturally came out, because whenever I was trying to write this dark, gritty novel, it wasn't true to who I was, and these jokes just kept coming out. And I felt like once I decided I'm just going to go with it and I'm going to enhance the humor just as much as I enhanced the tragedy, it became alive as a story.
I can talk about this book forever. I want to move on to writing at some point, but I do want to just come back to this idea, this universality, the scope, or if you think of things on a continuum, you have references in here to Shakespeare, to Larry McMurtry, to Kill a Mockingbird, to Lady Macbeth, to Pat Sajak. It really runs from kind of high culture, the greatest works in Western literature, to our daily lives on soap operas and so forth. And Mayhill sort of embodies that too, in the same way that he sort of embodies the heroic and the comical. He can be a simple East Texan, but he can also appreciate some of the profundities of our best works of literature. How did you decide on these references to include? And here's a tough question for an author, but have you read all the works that you reference?
Oh,
No one will ever know if not.
But I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like I got to be honest. I feel like, I've read like 95%. I mean, I think like most people will pull a quote or pull a reference without having read the entire book. So I'm going to allow myself some grace there. But I mean, most of those have been incredibly meaningful to me in some way. I mean, especially like the Transcendentalists. I mean, Henry David Thoreau, absolutely. I mean, and it's probably just because Dead Poet Society, and I was one of those like dark, moody high schoolers who suddenly found herself loving Henry David Thoreau. But I mean, and to answer your question about how did I decide upon that kind of character, that one really wasn't contrived, because I feel like those are the real people within reason of East Texas and of people I'm around all the time. That I mean, you're eating a Twinkie and you're watching Wheel of Fortune, but then you curl up at night with Lonesome Dove, or you're doing both of those things. And I have seen works where I think Michael Knoll, who is the director of Writers League of Texas, he made a joke one time about anytime there's, to use the term, like a hillbilly book, there will always be like someone who is a hillbilly poet, and it's this weird trope of trying to artificially connect two things. But I don't feel like it's artificial in a lot of cases, because I mean, some of the most well-read people I know, their accents are so thick that they would probably need a translator on the streets of New York.
Yeah, and it referenced in the book is Lonesome Dove more than once, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't recognize Larry McMurtry today, part of the Dallas Literary Festival. Few authors in Texas have contributed as much to the concept of a Texas writer as McMurtry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and for me, honestly, my biggest Larry McMurtry connection or experience was actually in 1989 when Lonesome Dove was the CBS miniseries. I mean, and it was profound on multiple levels, because I grew up in the woods with one channel, and we got a half extra channel out of Houston when it rained, but we got CBS. And then, so if there was a disruption to our normal programming, which Lonesome Dove absolutely was, it was kind of a momentous event. And I remember sitting there and watching it with my dad, and he just almost having a physical reaction to watching it. And I think at one point he did make a reference to, like, you know, we're all just Gus McCrae. And so I was able to embody this, or really watch him embody this idea of an East Texas man living out this fantasy every night between 7 and 9, you know? And so I just had an incredible childhood memory of that.
Well, tell us a little bit about your writing habits and your approach to writing. When do you write? You have a full-time job, which we'll talk about maybe later. You have children. In fact, you brought up the Transcendentalists. I think everybody should believe that you come by the Transcendentalism honestly, because your child's name is
Emerson. Hey, buddy.
That's right. And so with a child, husband, and a job, when do you write? When do you find time to write?
Right now, I'm not doing the best job of that. And I think, like, honestly, the pandemic has been difficult for a lot of us to do this consistently. But I tend to be kind of a sprinter, you know, like my sweet friend Gina and I, we were doing writing sprints where it's like, all right, it's 4 o'clock. We both happen to not be doing anything. Let's write for 30 minutes. And that has been really valuable. But I mean, I wish so much that I was the kind of person who's like, all right, I'm going to finish these next 4 chapters and I write every day between 8 and 10, or, oh, dear God, to be the kind of person who wakes up at 4 a.m. and it's like every day, it's like a religion for me. I just won't be that person. And I want to be that person, but I also have to recognize that it's been 40 years of me trying to get up early and instill good habits. And maybe I just need to accept that and try to do the best I can with 30 minutes here and there. I mean, because probably, I mean, the last half of this book was written at my child's Taekwondo studio. So that's why I felt pretty good about the fight scenes.
So you can write with other things going on around you.
I can, but I mean, I don't want to say that I'm just like so hyper focused, but I think it's more of a product of how disjointed my natural writing process is anyway. Because if I'm sitting alone in a quiet room, I'm absolutely going to check my phone and ask my friend, hey, what you doing? You know, and so I think that kind of keeping the writing going on in the background and me doing it a little bit to the side helps me I don't want to say take it less seriously, but I can get pretty perfectionist. And so I kind of have to do it. I have to do it when my unconscious brain isn't watching so much.
Are there family rules, like when you can bother mommy?
Oh, no, I'm able to be bothered at all times. But he's very respectful of that. And the thing that's really exciting about being a writer and having a kid is that my kid has taken a huge interest in writing, and he draws the most amazing cartoons and tells the most amazing stories. And it's really interesting to be able to share that with him at this age.
That's great. Is he into graphic novels?
Yes. So, I mean, any parents out there definitely know that Dave Pilkey rules the roost. And so, yeah, Dog Man and Captain Underpants, all the things that have way too much bathroom humor for my liking, but, you know, we're going with it.
Well, so you've sort of hinted at how you write, and you've called it disjointed and sort of write anywhere, although maybe some places better than others. It sounds like you don't do a lot of outlining. It sounds like you have ideas that you build outlines around more than you start off with a linear outline that you then fill in.
Yes, and what I'm trying right now with this next book that I'm writing is more just like creating bench posts that are benchmarks that I know where I want the scene to end, and so I'm just going to build up until that till I get there, because I think that I have tried too often to kind of fly by the seat of my pants, and perhaps I don't have enough faith in my focus in the creative process to do that. So I need a little bit of something to ground me and orient me. But so far this is working pretty well. And I mean, whenever I wrote the first novel, I wrote it by going through the writer's path at SMU. And what they did was basically teach you the hero's journey story structure. And so you had to you got the basis of your novel by writing the 12 core scenes of the hero's journey. And so I wrote all of those, but then I kind of finagled around it and ended up changing them, connecting them in different ways. So it's a mess, but whenever it starts to come together, it's really, I mean, it's nothing short of magic. And I don't take credit for that, but when people talk about the creative process and those magical little moments, it really is interesting, kind of like looking back on an event you went through in your life and understanding maybe a symmetry or a pattern to it, that it suddenly takes on a beautiful order. And so I'm starting to have more and more faith in that, because I have faith in that absolutely in life. And now I'm starting to apply that more to the creative process, that there will be some sort of interesting order to the mess.
Well, let's kind of combine the two things that we've discussed, which is the writing process. And then I'm going to use Ain't Nobody Nobody as sort of an example. And you can use that as a way to illustrate your writing path. You mentioned the hero and the writer's path. Robert Mayhill in Ain't Nobody Nobody is a hero. Different people have described different things that a hero must embody, but one thing that is pretty central is some idea of sacrifice. They have to do something for others. Could you describe how you use that in a broader sense of characterization?
In terms of how I settled on him as being a hero? Is that what
it could be, or what qualities you felt like a hero should embody and how you applied them to the characters in your book. And of course, there's different, there's other archetypes that appear in your book that you've used to sort of perfectly embody your concept of that character.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I first wrote the first draft of this book, and I say draft again, it being like these little pieces and little scenes, little vignettes everywhere, but the shape that I thought it was taking is that Randy Mayhill, he was just this side character who just kept inserting himself. But it was one of those things that whenever he came onto the page, my writing group loved it. I felt that certain bubbling up to where he brought a lot of life to every scene. And then whenever I was getting ready to start querying it, start submitting to agents and start really, wrapping this thing up, because you've got to make some decisions at some point, otherwise you can go on forever. I showed it to actually Tex Thompson, who's huge here in the Dallas literary community, an amazing teacher and very funny. And she just said, Randy Mayhill's your main character. And I was like, but he can't be. He's, kind of this like slightly obnoxious Hank Hill type character. And, he doesn't embody my liberal values, like that kind of stuff. And, but she was right. And so I began to build the story more around Mayhill. And so Mayhill really just did insert himself into the scene and to the book in general. And that is one thing that I learned also in terms of writing is I was trying to helicopter, I was trying to over orchestrate the book in terms of I'm going to sit down and write a character that is bossy, or I'm going to write a character who is driven in a certain way. And whenever I finally just accept the characters for who they are, I mean, this is big life lessons here. I know y'all came for writing, but life lessons. Once I really accepted the characters as who they were, they really started to flow quite easily, because I wanted Birdie, the daughter, to be the main character, because I could relate to that a lot. I was a teenager in the 90s in East Texas, and I was kind of brooding. But she wouldn't talk. I mean, she just wouldn't talk. I kept trying to get her to do stuff. And like any good teenager, she just kind of refused. And so once I leaned into that, as that is part of her character, the story really started to come together. And I'm really doing that right now with the book I'm writing, that I'm, as much as I can, when characters want to be silent, I'm just kind of asking, what is that actually about? And allowing them to be silent instead of trying to play God.
Well, Heather, you mentioned Birdie and how she was originally the main character. I immediately was able to pull up the book. A girl like Birdie, plain as bread, pleasant as gout. So maybe she wasn't ultimately destined to be the main character of a book that relies heavily on dialogue and voice. But You know, it's interesting. Woody Allen's Annie Hall, that was
Mm.
originally a murder mystery. And
Not know that.
when he finished the movie, it was about 30 hours of footage. The editor said, you know, the character that's interesting in here is Annie Hall. Throw out the murder mystery part and focus on the character of Annie Hall. He came back and did a Manhattan murder mystery about 15 years later using the original ideas for Annie Hall. So,
And Annie Hall's so much better than Manhattan Murder Mystery. See, I've done both of those.
the other characters, I mean, what are your inspirations for these characters? They're a mix of your creative imagination, people you've met, family members. Tell us about how you might light upon a character and mix these different elements into the person we see on the page.
Yeah, so the farmhand Bradley, he's just kind of this hapless, I mean, and I want to say kind of straight man, I mean, to the goofiness of Mayhill and to the brooding nature of Birdie. And so I needed him there. I needed him there to just be a contrast to their weirdness. But he was a very soft and sweet character. And because it was the 90s and because I was obsessed with Sublime, like a lot of girls my age were, I wanted to name him Bradley because Bradley was the lead singer of Sublime and he died an untimely death like a lot of people did in the 90s. So you'll notice in the book he wears an old Sublime shirt. And so, I mean, some of those are just little references because if you are getting to write your own book, you have to add your own shout outs there wherever you can. There is also like a feral cat named Emerson in the book. So, because I had to put, you know, my boy in there somehow because I wanted him to have that experience. But yeah, in terms of, I mean, so the main character, one of the main characters, Oni, she is the mother of Van, who has committed suicide, and kind of the matriarch who is possibly going crazy, possibly grieving, we don't quite know. But so much of the dialogue, so much of her dialogue is based on a very dear friend of ours who actually, him and his wife, and many of the conversations we had about religion, because he was a retired Methodist minister, but also very progressive in his Christianity, and also toward the end of his life, very much a Taoist. And so, I mean, I very much got the phrase, don't confuse the moon for the finger pointing to the moon. And what that meant in terms of Christianity, of course, was, you know, don't confuse the Bible itself with the, you know, bigger meaning of Jesus, which was of grace and of forgiveness. And so I really love that and gravitated toward it. And especially since, you know, I grew up in an environment that was not necessarily in my own home, but East Texas is pretty conservative with their Christianity. And so there was a lot of talk of going to hell, as I just read in that passage. And so to be an adult woman who was recognizing that that brand of Christianity wasn't going to work for my brain, it was really incredible to understand that there was a sect of Christianity or a different view of Christianity that allowed for the intellect, allowed for the grace, allowed for all of those things. And he very much presented that for me. And so I wanted that to be embodied with a lot of Oni's dialogue because I found it incredibly powerful. And there's a line where after her son commits suicide, the minister comes to the house, as they often do, and says, well, was your son baptized? And she said, every time it rained. And I think that also harkens back to just nature being church in so many ways. So the spirituality of nature, which hopefully comes through in the book.
And you mentioned religion, but I want to talk about that, but I want to just bring up three other characters. There are three Jimmys. And is that because everybody's named Jimmy in East Texas or has a nickname of Jimmy?
Yes, between my husband and I, we have three uncles named Jimmy. And I did put a little acknowledgement in the back of the book that I felt guilty because the Jimmys are kind of bad guys in the book. And I wanted to be very clear, it was not based on any of the many Jimmys. I know they were all lovely men, but yeah, literally everyone's named Jimmy in some way. And so there had to be a tribunal of Jimmys.
And I think Laura has just announced that she has a cousin named Jimmy.
Of course you do. It might be my cousin.
Well, let's talk a little bit about symbolism, because you also incorporate symbolism through the book. Some of it may be purposive, some of it may have been subconscious, some of it may not be real symbolism. That may be just what I read.
Oh, good. It's Mike's Rorschach test.
That's
Tell me
right.
what you experienced, Mike.
You mentioned that as a therapist, you like to turn the questions around, but we will do it this way.
I'm horrible at parties. So.
How do you incorporate, does it come organically, or is it later that you come back and populate the novel with symbolism to build a coherence to the overall theme?
I think like what I've learned so far is that kind of like with the whole character approach, which is you do the work, maybe you set out with some sort of intention, but then the character will then kind of develop into something else. And you have a choice then. You can either say, no, you shall be this, kind of like being a jerk parent, or you can let the child unfold. My friend who I referenced before, when we had a baby, he very much said, it is your job not to mold the child, it is to unfold the child. And so I really love that. And so I believe that with the character aspect, but I also believe that with the symbolism, that there were certain symbols that I kept gravitating toward, like the hogs. I just really like feral hogs because they're not killing my dogs, for example. So I can love feral hogs. I'm loving them from a city viewpoint, but they're horribly destructive and have caused millions and millions of dollars in damage. But once I started writing about hogs, I was like, actually, this is a perfect backdrop for chaos. It's a perfect example of the way that stories proliferate, the stories that we create about ourselves and other people. And so I'm not trying to get too heady or too precious about it, but I think some symbols naturally present themselves and you can choose to highlight them in certain ways. And so I chose to highlight the hogs as a symbol of chaos and a symbol of change. And so I did, there were once or twice, the hogs were showing up because it's East Texas, but there were a few scenes where I was like, I understand what's happening here. This is a turning point for a character. So I'm just going to throw a hog in the mix to make sure that I'm doing my writerly duties.
Well, and the theme of the Dallas Literary Festival is also turbulence, and they create that kind of chaotic, turbulent mood and plot unfolding. You mentioned that you're not molding your child, you're unfolding. That rings a little hollow when you name him Emerson. And then you say he's turning into a writer.
But you have to have an intention, Mike. I stand by what I say, because we had the intention that we're going to have this like naturalist, spiritualist kid. So we're going to start him on a certain path, Well, we're not naming him like Kardashian or anything like that. So.
Thank you. On behalf of humanity.
You're welcome.
You mentioned the hogs and the chaos. They really come across as sort of a biblical plague, and there, it is a happy circumstance that the area you're describing has the Trinity River run through it. So you've got this concept of a Trinity. There's the concept of regeneration and other things. Tell me if I'm off base, but there is you often mention birds, whether they're buzzards. There's the hummingbirds, which are kind of flighty and beautiful, but then you also have the shrike and the owl, which are predatory. Was that conscious, or is that just something because nature is part of the book that you tried to write?
I think it's more that nature is part of the book that I'm trying to write. But if I look back, I feel like I do punctuate a lot of areas of my life with nature, which is hilarious living in East Dallas, of course. But even last year when the pandemic started, it was within the first week or two of us being home that suddenly we discovered 3 chrysalises hanging on our cactus in the back. And so anytime I see a chrysalis now, I think, pandemic, but like in an actually a good way. But yeah, nature is how everyone until the last few generations has defined their entire experience of their lives, whether it was trying to escape rattlesnakes or trying to make sure that they had enough food for their kids. And so I think that my inclusion of so much nature does go back to the transcendentalism, because that is where spirituality resides for me. But beyond that, I just want more of that. I also want a dog, so I wrote dogs into the book. And so that is where the godlike part of the author comes in. It's like, I shall manifest this, because I can't have enough nature in my normal life right now, so I'm going to write about it.
Well, that actually reminds me of something that I've never asked you about. And maybe it's just me and the books that I read, but you get away with something in this book that I haven't seen other authors or editors try. And that is, you have the characters' thoughts and such, which of course, if it was real life, we wouldn't necessarily know. But then in a godlike fashion, you, apart from the characters, you insert various thoughts in parentheses. And we don't, and so it might be, you know, it's just a parenthetical added addition that you are providing for backstory, or sometimes it's very humorous. But it's just like, you know, Mayhill thought about the books that he had read recently. And then in parentheses, we will say Shakespeare, Larry McMurtry. What prompted you to do that? And because I don't see that very often.
That one came pretty naturally, because I do think that, I don't want to bring it back to myself, because I'm not the narrator in that book. There is a specific narrator, but I do think that we often talk that way, that I'm going to give the overall heading, but then I'm going to get more specific. And maybe that's just a product of how we teach kids to write. But I think that it's more of just, let me tell you the overview, and then I'm going to get a little more granular. But I'm glad you found that humorous, because I did use that as a place for humor, because once I started doing that, I just thought it was a really fun convention. And it was just almost like someone telling a story and then just kind of whispering to the side, but you should also know this. And so I think it also added to the conversational aspect of it a lot. But I mean, at the time I was, I'm glad you like that big narrator, because I mean, at the time I was reading Zadie Smith, White Teeth. And that was also one of the moments where the voice kind of clicked for me, because it had the humor, but it also had this big godlike narrator. And so I just got more and more curious, who is this godlike narrator? What jokes are they making and why? And so it was a little bit of a mystery to me too.
When I thought about it, it came off as a little bit of a kind of an informal Greek chorus. And I know we have lots of questions, so I'll end with this one last question and then turn it over to Blake to kind of moderate the incoming questions. But your full-time job, your day job is as a therapist. How does that inform your work, and how has it been affected, maybe with the writing as well, by the pandemic?
Yeah, I've been busier during the pandemic. I am a therapist who specializes in anxiety. And so, and we all have that right now. My husband just wrote Mayhill was one of her favorite clients. So that's very
coming.
Yeah. But I will say that the process of writing has informed my therapy, because kind of like I said, that I have found so much wisdom, and not that I came up with it, but it was just the process of going through it, of letting things unfold without trying to over orchestrate them, but trying to set yourself up for the best possible scenario. And so in terms of anxiety counseling, I can go off on a huge tangent with this, but one of the approaches that I take is that anxiety and creativity they go hand in hand, that they are basically two sides of the same coin. Because if you look at creativity, it's unique thoughts, it's basically trying to come up with the weirdest patterns in the world, and maybe connecting things that aren't there. And if you look at what anxiety is, it's actually being incredibly creative about all the terrible things that can happen in this world. And I mean, I think we've all experienced this, that, you know, in the midst of COVID, if you have taken it seriously, you've probably imagined all these bizarre scenarios of how you could actually get COVID by like that house plant behind you, you know, something like that. And that it takes an incredibly creative mind. And so in the therapy room, or the therapy Zoom, if I start looking at anxiety as a maladaptive creative response, we have a lot of room there, because then we can start channeling the creativity into something else. And I don't necessarily mean, be like, everyone, please write a novel if you're anxious, because dear Lord, we are not known for our mental health, by the way. But recognizing that our creativity serves us in a lot of ways, and what we can do with that creativity when it starts to go off the deep end. I think it can really open up some worlds for people. Did that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you for that insight. And before I turn it over to Blake, I just want to comment that I noticed that Kathleen Kent is with us as our audience.
Yay.
And she was previously featured on the Texas Big Read, and you did a great job moderating that. It was very interesting to hear about. And maybe with some of the audience questions that Blake may have time to incorporate, you can finish by telling us a little bit about your next book as well. But Blake, I will turn it over to you.
Hold on, I want to add something real quick, because I meant to do this at the beginning, but you jumped right on it. But I wanted to say that the way that Mike and I actually met, I was going to promise Blake I would tell him that, is that I had my book launch at Interrobang Books, which was amazing, and surrounded by friends and family. And then I was sent off as a new author to go on a very small book tour across Texas, and ended up at Murder by the Book in Houston. And I did not know what to expect as a debut author. I wasn't expecting a auditorium by any means, but I walk into my first non-family essentially book signing, and there are, in my recollection, there are 6 people there, and I had invited 4 of them, including my mother and my college roommate, who is here today. And I'm supposed to be standing in front of them looking like this important literary person now, but it's my mom, and my college roommate has enough stuff on me that I really should get a hitman after her. But the other 2 people in the audience were Mike Yawn and his wonderful girlfriend Stephanie, and they just happened to be in Houston. And I will say that that was a really special time for me, because as I was going out there speaking to these people, and 2 people I didn't know, I was like, this is going to be incredibly awkward. But I tried to take my own therapeutic advice, which is of course terrible when you're pointing it on yourself, but it's like, lean in, you have no idea what wonderful things could happen in this, this new environment. And then Mike and I became great friends, and I've just been so thankful for that. And then my mom ended up knowing his grandparents, who were from our random East Texas small town. So I'm just really grateful for that. And you've been such a supporter of the book. So thank you for doing this today. And he also interviewed like Leslie Stahl and Paula Hawkins and all these people. And so, yeah, no pressure here. So
I like your book best. And your roommate is taking this opportunity to bribe you with you see who your real friends are.
Yes,
but Blake, thank you for your indulgence on letting us tell these stories. And I think we have lots of questions from the audience if there's time remaining.
Yes, well, I love that story. That's kind of amazing that y'all just met at the bookstore, and then here you are. And Mike, thank you so much for those, just taking us through Heather's book and all those great questions. It is kind of serendipitous how you just kind of, if you lean into things, like you said, Heather.
I had not read the book when I showed up. I was really we were in Houston, Stephanie and I, and we said, well, it sounds interesting. Let's see what it is. And then we bought it, and then we read it, and we would read it sort of separately, but together. And I would hear her chuckling, and then she would hear me chuckling. And it turned out we were laughing at the same scenes.
And Mike is also an incredible photographer, and he did take a picture that night that I was excited to get, because I was like, yay, my first, big girl book signing. And I look so like confounded. I'm just like, and so I feel like that's going to be on the next book jacket.
That's great. I love that. Well, thanks, Mike. Those were such great questions. I will turn it over to some of our audience questions that we got here in the chat. And if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask this question. So I'm going to start with Kelly. Put a question in the chat. Kelly, would you like to answer? I'm sorry, would you like to ask the question, or I'm happy to do it for you?
I can ask. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you. Awesome. Thanks, Kelly.
Kelly Yandel is a brilliant Texas author. And if we have any agents on the line. Snatch her up.
Well, I'm out in the boonies, so I don't know how my Wi-Fi is going to hold up. But I was curious, as someone who is writing about my area, which is sort of Wichita Falls, Clay County thing, did you get any response from people that you didn't know or did know in East Texas about how you treated your community? Like how you reflected upon it? Did they like the characters? Did they think you were making fun of them? Did you get any feedback on how they took it, or did they appreciate it?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it was one that I was super nervous about, because I absolutely meant that as a love letter. I mean, it's a dark love letter, but it's a love letter nonetheless, because I love those people and I love the quirkiness. And I mean, in my family, our love language is making fun of each other, you know? And so I don't think I was overly harsh about anyone, but yeah, I could see someone getting mad, but I didn't hear that. I mean, honestly, I got some random emails, which is so weird to have someone you don't know like write you an email and tell you, oh my gosh, that you could have written about my hometown. And that felt really special. And I think a lot of people felt the love come through. And then, you know, and my cousins, their small town, a guy that, you know, was friends with my cousin, and we just see each other once every few years if he happens to be around at Christmas. He was asking me all sorts of questions, and he really seemed to love it. And that was honestly the biggest compliment to me, because I just didn't know. And then of course I was worried that anyone who knew a Jimmy would think that I was hating on their Jimmy. So there was that, but everyone seemed to really get that it was an appreciative portrayal. But I will say, I mean, one thing that did surprise me is that there was one part of East Texas where I was very specific about it, because there is a real estate developer who does take advantage of rural folk and will have people move in from all over the country, and then they suddenly don't have wells or water or anything like that. And while I didn't try, I didn't want to write anything pointed about anyone. I think that that is a crime against humanity, and he's hurt a lot of people. So I did want to just make reference to that, because it's pretty messed up. And then I had a friend point that out, that, oh man, you talked about that. And I was like, yeah, I did. And it's, you know, clearly wasn't making this huge political stance, but I think there's value in recognizing that that kind of stuff happens, that poverty is exploited. You know, does that answer it?
All right, thank you, Kelly. We also got another question in the chat from Scott. Scott, do you want to unmute yourself, and or should I ask?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay,
yes,
there you go, Scott.
He's an incredible author from Austin. Y'all should get his stuff.
Excellent. Yeah, I interviewed Heather for my show, Austin Lady Limits. So, but the question I had is, you had mentioned that lines come to you and then you build scenes around the lines. Can you tell us about when those lines come to you, how you dictate them? Do you put them on your phone? Do you carry a notebook? Do you have scraps of paper? How do you kind of like collate all these lines?
That's interesting. Thank you. I like that question. It's whatever is around, you know, so I mean, often it's going to be my phone, because it's an appendage for all of us. So I'll type a little note to myself, or but it's often just like a phrase, you know, like I can't do something on the spot, but you know, that squirrel looks like a purse, or something ridiculous like that. And I will write that down, and then hopefully make it better as I do something important with it, whatever that means. But yeah, sometimes also that's just how I get into writing. If I sit down and I make this joking attempt that I'm going to write 1,000 words today, it will always start with phrases that I just think are kind of cool. So yeah, I don't mean to sound like that it's magical by any means, but I just think language is the fun way of, it's my entry into writing, because I know you're probably more into like the plot. I mean, that being oftentimes an entry for you. But I mean, also reading other people's books. I just read, one of my best friends for my birthday gave me a very hilarious book about suicide, because that's what best friends do. It actually is hilarious, but it's called All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Taves. And she has wonderful turns of phrase. And so I'll sometimes write down those turns of phrase and then riff on them for myself, because it jogs my memory and jogs my creative spirit, I suppose. Thank you.
All right, Brian, what about you? You have
Hello.
a question for Heather?
Oh, hey.
I'm in San Francisco, and as a playwright, I was wondering if there's an audio version in the works. I know that's more something your publisher, or who you imagined in your mind, if it was one person, or if you'd have a cast and dramatize it. I always imagined Nick Offerman, kind of a grittier version of him playing Mayhill.
That is pretty genius. Admittedly, I had never thought of Nick Offerman, but I think it could work. It absolutely could work. I mean, I feel like someone like John C. Reilly would be a little too bumbling because but I love John C. Reilly also. And I think he just did Sisters, Brothers, Patrick DeWitt's thing. Didn't he do that? But yeah, I mean, I feel like some obvious answers would be like McConaughey, because I mean, if we talk Texas, we're obviously going to do that. But I think also he's too smooth. I mean, personally, if I could just choose anyone in the whole world, there is a wonderful friend of mine who is an actor at Upright Citizens Brigade, Julie Brister, and she's a native Texan, and she is just hilarious. And I feel like she would get it and she would do it absolute justice. But you're right. I feel like it would have to be honestly a cast in my world to do it right. But, you know, that's expensive. Probably aren't going to do that. Thank you.
Tommy Lee Jones.
Oh, that's good.
Texan.
I will take that under
And a
consideration
character
when they
named-
ask me.
And a character named Tommy Jones in the novel.
Yes, yes.
All right, thanks for that question, Brian. What about you, Alexandra? You have a question as well.
Oh yeah, first of all, I wanted to say I'm a poet, and so I actually find it really refreshing, Heather, that you think of lines or images as triggers, because I could never like write the kind of prose where you're explaining someone walking across a living room, or I am not a plot maker. So I just love that. It's a very refreshing idea of letting a line kind of become the center of a scene, even though the scene's not there yet. So I love that approach.
Thank you. And I'm horrible at choreography, by the way. I mean, it's literally like they raise their arm, they take a drink, and I mean that stuff has to be edited out because it's horrendous.
So that's just inspiring for me to hear as a poet. And then I just wanted to, I have a very hard time writing opening lines to poems, and I know I've heard novelists talk about the dreaded thing, the first line of the novel, and I just loved the opening to your book. It was so vivid. It kind of, you know, we immediately find, you know, Ray with Randy with he's in his pajamas, and of course the hogs. So can you tell us, like, was it hard for you to come up with that first line, or was it something that came later in the process, or was it just, you know, something that came to you right away? Like, how did you approach the first line to the novel dilemma?
Yeah, I mean, since I don't write linearly, that probably, the beginning probably came in the middle of my writing process. And of course, since, you know, I kind of told y'all that me deciding that Randy was more the centerpiece here, that all had to be changed once I realized he was, you know, because I honestly don't remember what the first line was, but I did know that because I wanted it to be this kind of faux epic voice, you know, it's like in the year of our Lord, 1996, I wanted that kind of tone. So I wanted to start out with some kind of faux importance. And then I thought it made sense, him killing a hog in his pajamas. And of course, he's not going to shoot it. Of course, he's going to stab it. And I mean, I was kind of horrified because I don't like animal violence. I mean, I eat animals, but, you know, someone else does that for me, and I recognize the hypocrisy. I'm working on it, all this good stuff. But yeah, I mean, and also I told you a little bit before that the Book Cougars podcast, which is the best name for a podcast ever. And if you want to learn about new reads, please go to the Book Cougars podcast with Emily and Chris. But Chris ended up really loving the book, and it was the first time I'd heard anyone talk about my book out loud. So that was really exciting. But she said, without knowing me or anything, she's like, I almost didn't even finish this book because of the first page, because of the, you know, the harm to animals. And I was like, I'm with you. I almost didn't finish the book because of the harm to animals in the first page. But I do hope that I made him enough of an animal lover that line was distinct for the reader, that they felt safe with me.
No, it's a great, I mean, we get so much just in I did note your use of in the year of the Lord, 1996. So I love that idea of the faux epic. And I love that, you know, the dogs are in there right away, and they are they're hunting dogs. They've cornered a wild hog, and one dog has his mouth clamped on the ear of the hog. And then in the very next line, there's, you know, Mayhill and his boxers with his holster. So I love how the holster is introduced. It's like, oh, okay, this is probably a cop or a detective, but we're not told outright that's what he is. So I just thought it was a great introduction to him as a character.
You. And I bought into it too, even though I hated the the killing of an animal, but I felt like it made so much sense because I wanted immediately for someone to see this is a guy who goes in, whether he should go in or not, he's always in it. Because we all have that friend. It's like, I'm going in, I'm going to say it, I'm going to do it. And I love those people. I like those big personalities. So I wanted him to be big from the start.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I just had to unmute myself. I know with the Dallas Book Festival, we have kind of a harder out at 4 o'clock because there's other panels and stuff starting. So I do want to thank Mike for being here and leading this great conversation. Thank you, Mike, for doing that. And Heather, thank you for being here. You moderated Kathleen Kent, and it was amazing. And then you're back, and we love your book. And thank you so much for being on the Big Texas Read. I posted the Book Cougars episode 92 with Heather Harper Ellett in the chat. Yeah. And Alexandra also put a link there, a plug for Austin Liddy Limits, the podcast there. So, but yeah, thank you all for spending your Saturday with us on the Big Texas Read. It's great you're here as part of the Dallas Literary Festival. And if there's no other questions, we will in this Zoom meeting with great thanks to Heather and Mike for being here today.
And thank y'all. And please check out Gemini Inc. and Writers Workshop Dallas for all sorts of great classes. So please go do that because you too can have fun as a writer. It's not torturous at all.
Yeah, the line between anxiety and creativity. I wrote that one down. That was great.
Well, I'm surfing that wave all the time. So I'll see y'all there.
Yes. Oh, and before everyone goes, I just want to put this link to Heather on Austin Liddy Limits there in the chat. So you can get that there from Scott. And all right, well, thank you all. We'll have our next Big Texas Read, David, on the 21st of this month. And do you want to tell the folks a little bit about our next author?
Yes, we're pleased to have Amanda Air Ward and her book, The Jet Setters. I don't know if you guys know this book or know Amanda, but she's a force of nature like Heather, actually. You should join Heather. I think you would really, you don't know her, right?
No, I don't know her personally, but I know the book.
Yeah, I think you guys would hit it off, quite frankly.
Thanks.
You have the same sort of like smart energy going on. And Amanda, Reese Witherspoon chose Amanda's book for her book club. So Amanda is launched into the stratosphere, and it's so nice that she's decided to come down to earth and join us for the Big Texas Read, April 21st, Wednesday at 7 p.m. And Sheila Black will be moderating. Sheila's an incredible poet and just the most lovely, lovely lady on the planet. So please come join us. It's actually gonna be super duper fun. I actually can't wait to hear this talk. It's gonna be fun. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Come.
All right, everybody. Thank you
Bye.
so much, and have a great rest of your weekend. And we'll see you next time.
Dallas.
Bye.
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
Dallas.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Heather.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Heather.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you. Thank y'all. You're so sweet.
Thanks, Mike. Y'all are amazing.